Next presentation is from Team Contagion Busters with the title Official Introduction of Ispq Code. Please welcome Team Contagion Busters.
For prevention of infectious disease.
For unified international quarantine standard.
For sustainable maritime transportation. Starting from Ispq code.
We are Contagion Busters.
Good morning, honorable judges, fellow delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. We are sincerely pleased to be here today. Once again, we are Team Contagion Busters, and we would like to propose the Ispq code. Our presentation consists of 4 parts: introduction, problem analysis, solution, and lastly, conclusion. This delegate will take charge of introduction and problem analysis part. In the first part, I will introduce about the Ispq code. The Ispq code is the international code for the quarantine of ships and port facilities. The background of proposing the Ispq code is the necessity of the quarantine regulations in the maritime sector after the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic situation. The purpose of the Ispq code is to ensure the reliability of appropriate quarantine measures by establishing an international cooperation system. We borrowed the idea from the ISPS code. After the 9/11 terror, ISPS code was adopted to strengthen security of ships and port facilities. Likewise, after the COVID-19 pandemic situation, we think that the Ispq code also should be adopted to prepare for collective infections of ships and port facilities. For appropriate application of Ispq code, WHO and IMO should work as a group. WHO analyzes the disease, such as routes of transmission, major symptoms, and countermeasures. Based on the information from WHO, IMO provides guidelines for safe entry and departure of ship and crew exchange. On this page, we are going to find out the connection between IMO's strategic plan and our goal. Our goal is to prevent infectious disease in early stage and to unify international quarantine system for ships and port facilities. This goes under IMO's direction, strategic direction number 6, which is development of IMO regulations and improving the IMO's working practices. And we think that the Ispq code can be promoted by creating ad hoc working group between the Facilitation Committee and Maritime Safety Committee. So, why do we suggest the Ispq code? Because there are some existing problems currently. In this part, we will take a look at the major problems caused by existing policy. First problem is lack of countermeasures. As you can see on the screen, there have been various infectious diseases so far. Whenever such diseases occurred, IMO and governments presented guidelines. However, the guidelines were always presented only after the failure of initial response to the disease. This led to port lockdown, and it has some problems like difficulties of crew exchange and suspension of global supply chain. If the actions on pandemic situation were prepared before the pandemic arose, port lockdown would not happen. If we cannot predict it, we have to prevent it in advance. Second problem is that the quarantine regulations are different by each country. In the point that those different regulations can confuse crews on ship, standardization and simplification is needed. To summarize, no one knows when, where, or how the infectious diseases will occur. So prevention is the best way to prevent the worldwide pandemic situation. There are major points that our proposal pursues. Effective quarantine, health of seafarer, simplified document. From the next solution part, we will cover the details of these main points. This finishes this delegate section of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, First Delegate, for your presentation. This delegate will now continue the presentation. In this part, this delegate will introduce about main subjects in Ispq code. First one is administration. It is the government of a country in which a ship is entitled to raise its national flag. And it has a duty to approve the procedures related to implementation of ship quarantine plan whenever it changes. Second is contracting government. It is a representative of the country who has the responsibility of joining the international agreement. And its duty is to establish and modify quarantine level of port facility. Third is company quarantine officer. It is a designated person by the company to ensure the contact with port facility quarantine officer and ship quarantine officer, and to manage ship quarantine plan. And its duty is to conduct appropriate quarantine assessment for ships. Fourth is ship quarantine officer. It is a designated person by the company as a responsible officer for the quarantine of ship. And its duty is to conduct regular quarantine inspection on ship to ensure the maintenance of proper quarantine measures. And last one is port facility quarantine officer. It is a responsible officer for the development and maintenance of the port facility quarantine plan. And its duty is to conduct regular inspection on port facility. For your understanding, a diagram showing relationship of subjects is prepared. Ship quarantine officer reports the conduction of ship quarantine activities to company quarantine officer. And company quarantine officer supports ship quarantine activities responsible by ship quarantine officer. And lastly, port facility quarantine officer and company quarantine officer or ship quarantine officer agree for setting quarantine level between ship and port facility. On this page, I will introduce two main certificates of Ispq code. One is ship quarantine plan. It is a document to ensure the application of measures on board. And another one is declaration of quarantine. It is an agreement between a ship and a port facility or another ship on the specific interaction of quarantine measures. From now, I will introduce about quarantine levels. In Ispq code, there are 3 quarantine levels. Level 1 means ships and port facilities are routinely operated and ordinary quarantine measures are maintained. And level 2 means due to increased risk of infectious diseases, enhanced quarantine measures are to be maintained at ships and port facilities. And lastly, level 3 means due to critical risk of infectious diseases, highest quarantine measures should always be maintained at ships and port facilities. Contracting government autonomously designates the level of port facility, and administration autonomously designates the level of national flag carrier. When the quarantine level of port and ship is different, declaration of quarantine is used to respect their autonomy. From now on, let's proceed to details of Ispq code. Ispq code is divided into Part A and Part B. While Part A is mandatory requirements, Part B is recommended regulation. Let's see Part A first. In Part A, actions by quarantine level are stated as a mandatory requirement. This part defines necessary regulations that needs to be followed in level 1. and other regulations of level 1, 2, 3 are written in Part B. Then now let's see Part B. Part B is recommended regulation, so complying with it is an option. The document presented on the screen is actions by quarantine level on ship side. I will introduce typical examples by each level. For example, in level 1, execute quarantine training. And in level 2, disinfect the vessel. And in level 3, all crew must wear authorized quarantine equipment. Next, this is actions by quarantine level on port side. For example, in level 1, prevent unauthorized entry into port facility. In level 2, prepare a contingency plan for vessel infection. And in level 3, prepare a screening clinic in port facility. This finishes this delegate section of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, second delegate. I am the last delegate of this presentation. Before proceeding to the conclusion, I will explain the application of Ispq code. We summarize 2 cases of applying Ispq code. Case number 1, the procedure and meaning of issuing declaration of quarantine when the ship and port facility quarantine levels are different. If the ship level is lower than port facility, fill out declaration of quarantine after mutual agreement. When the ship quarantine officers write the declaration of quarantine, the ship's level will be raised. Then the measurement will be implemented accordingly. Through this declaration of quarantine, it can guarantee the autonomy of administration and contracting government. Case number 2, the procedure of applying Ispq code in the event of a new disease. After the outbreak of disease, administration and contracting government implement initial response by actions of relevant quarantine levels. And when WHO establish accurate countermeasures and information, IMO suggests new guideline accordingly. By this guideline, administration and contracting government add or exclude countermeasure for ship and port facility if necessary. Through this systematic response, it prevents the global spread of disease and ensures successful quarantine actions. Part 4 is conclusion. We did that just like ISPS code, Ispq code also should be entered into force under SOLAS. It should form the basis for a comprehensive mandatory quarantine for international shipping. Moreover, it should ensure the proper maritime quarantine measurements are in place on ship and port facility. From this page, I'm going to introduce you about 4 benefits which is expected from Ispq code. First, by using standard quarantine document form, the vessel's crew's workload can be reduced. Second, by effective crew repatriation, it can relieve the crew's fatigue. Third, by appropriate quarantine actions, it can prevent infectious disease becoming serious. And lastly, by continuous implementation, it can provide effective counterplan for infectious disease on the future. However, there should be an agreement of each country for adoption of Ispq code. Therefore, we have organized the factors which can obtain each country's agreement. The advantagements of Ispq code have been mentioned earlier. In addition to this, the following factors can reduce the burden of applying the convention. First, Ispq code only changed the detail from the existing system, which is ISPS code, so it can reduce the burden of each country. Second, Ispq code is divided into mandatory and recommended parts, so it can reduce the burden of developing country by fully considering the difference between developed country. Lastly, Ispq code is a convention for preparing for possible threat of infectious disease. Through this, we can expect establishing more efficient quarantine procedure on the future. By these factors, I mentioned it above, we can expect to obtain the agreement from member states. Lastly, we have classified the ultimate goals into short and long term. In short term, it aims to present specific direction for the international quarantine system and systematize countermeasure against infectious disease. However, in long term, it aims to prevent the spread of infectious disease and unify the quarantine system of ship and port facility. This is end of our presentation, and thank you for listening our presentation.
Thank you, Team Contagion Busters, for very interesting presentation. So we will have a Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Team Lighthouse?
We all know that Korea has started with corona policy recently, but America and Europe countries have started it like months ago. So my question is that the policy of each countries about quarantine or any things about the diseases will be different country by country and continent by continent. So considering the fact that the code of the IMO should be mandatory to the IMO member countries, how will your code conform to all member countries' policy about the quarantine? Thank you.
Thank you for your valuable question. So we insist that to shorten the gap between the developed and developing countries or another member states, we said that there is Part A and Part B. So Part A is mandatory part, and it has minimum standards. And Part B, it is recommended regulations. So, for example, for developed countries, they are possible to follow all regulations for Part A and Part B. But developing countries, is hard to follow those regulations like Delegate said. So our proposal is to gradually for developing countries, they can gradually follow the Part B. Thank you.
And to addition, as we mentioned it, our course idea is borrowed from ISPS code, right? So as you can see in ISPS code, it also took a long years to fully applying all conventions to different country. So we expect the Ispq code also gonna take a long time for exception or adjust or revise it for each country. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Yeah, from George.
First of all, congratulations to your excellent presentation. It's very interesting to hear your very timing idea about this quarantine issue nowadays. And I have one concern about your idea. Among various IMO instruments, there are many ways to suggest this kind of idea, such as a guidelines or code, as you suggested, or convention. But you suggested a very strong point with the mandatory code first. But normally, IMO, when we bring a issue we start with a very some softened idea with a guideline to increase the acceptance from industry. So my question is, why did your group pick up this as a mandatory code instead of a recommendatory guidelines, or instead of a strong convention? You chose the middle one. Could you explain why you chose this as a mandatory code?
Thank you for your valuable questions. I have just understand that why do we choose for the Ispq code? So I think, as we mentioned it as in problem analysis, there is a lot of problems about IMO's guideline. It is not specific for each disease, and it only recommended and not mandatory. As you can see in COVID-19 IMO guideline, it just mentioned it to combat the key workers for the seafarer. So it means always it's not mandatory and only recommended. So we think the mandatory part is needed in the various countries for quarantine activities. Thank you.
In addition to that, so our proposal wanted to make a system. So for making a system, it has to be in direction. So our proposal wanted to propose the direction first. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Team C Buffalo. Oh, sorry. Triple Silver. Yep.
Thank you for your insight presentation. Team Contagion Busters says 3 quarantine levels according to this disease situation, and if there is some mandatory monitoring system about the Ispq code and quarantine level, which is going well about whole things. Thank you.
Sorry, Delegate, but can you please repeat the question again, sir?
If there's some mandatory monitoring system of SPQ code and quarantine level of which is going well over whole things.
So you mean the monitoring system will work?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you believe the monitoring system will work realistically?
Thank you for your valuable questions. As we just said, like we just borrowed idea from ISPS code. You can see the part of security, the port and port facility and ship's security level as like declaration of security is working effectively worldwide. So we expect and suggest the Ispq code will be efficient enough for the ship quarantine and port facility quarantine. Thank you.
Next question from Judge. Yep.
Yes, it was a well-timed presentation with a very good idea. And as I understand, in your presentation, you said that one of the advantage of this code is that they can reduce the workload of seafarers. Could you elaborate more on this? Because I'm telling you this, when we see the implementation of ISPS code, we found that there are a lot of paperwork on board the vessels. So rather than in reducing their workload, I found that it increased their workload.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable question, sir. So, quarantine situation is all different by each country. So crew of seafarers need to search the quarantine documents for each different countries, and consider the systems for each countries. But by ship quarantine plan, we can standardize and simplificate the quarantine measures. So we insist that crews on ship can reduce the workload. Thank you.
And to addition, nowadays, because of many conventions which IMO suggests, the crew's workload is getting maximum, I thought. So by this unified and simplified document form, it can reduce the crew's workload effectively. Thank you.
Great answer. Team Mare Nostrum.
Distinguished delegates, thank you for your excellent presentation. I wanted to pose a question that is quarantine IMO's coverage of responsibility? Because IMO is an international organization that covers everything related to the maritime. And even, however, if you see, for instance, like MLC, even though MLC states the rights of seafarers, it's under the ILO, which is an international labor organization. Shouldn't quarantine be under WHO instead of IMO? Or, as mentioned in your 6th slide, if WHO and IMO cooperate together, wouldn't it be better to have the WHO as a subject of your quarantine code?
Thank you for your thoughtful question, Delegate. we insist that the IMO should implement this Ispq code because in maritime sector, International Maritime Organization is subject. So, and the WHO is responsible for disease itself. So, in the maritime sector, in the quarantine site, IMO should be the subject. Thank you.
Just like to summarize, and as we just said, yes, right. The disease is the part and subject which is WHO is main, and as you just mentioned it, International Maritime Organization, which is IMO, is the subject of maritime transportation or safety. So we insist that the ad hoc working group or joint working of IMO, which with WHO, could be fully efficient enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Time is up. Thank you, Team Contagion Busters. Please return to your seat.